These are the dimensions Solomon used for the foundation of the temple of God, using the old standard of measurement. It was 90 feet long and 30 feet wide. The entry room at the front of the temple was 30 feet wide, running across the entire width of the temple, and 30 feet high. He overlaid the inside with pure gold. The old standard of measurement was a cubit equal to 18 inches. The new standard was a cubit of approximately 21 inches. Interesting. So, the agreed upon length of a cubit apparently changed at some point. What's up, cool people? My name's Matt. Welcome back to our Bible study. So, we are looking at 2 Chronicles chapter 3. And, 1 Chronicles was pretty much, alright, here's everything about the history of the Israelites, very briefly summed up, right up until you start getting to the kings. And then it's like, okay, because this is where things, really started obviously affecting our standing with God and our status as exiles. Here's a bunch of details on some things that went wrong, some things that went well, and their direct connection to God. Because ultimately, whether or not we've been following God is the main reason that these things went well or poorly. Makes it kind of makes a little more sense than when you see or read about people in the New Testament who seem to have a very works-based theology of their relationship with God. Like that they seem to think everything good or bad is based on, what people do. But anyway, let me not digress too far on that tangent. So, first couple of chapters of 2 Chronicles were about Solomon starting his reign as king, asking God for wisdom, and then making preparations to start building the temple. Which brings us to chapter 3 here. So, here we go. 2 Chronicles chapter 3. So Solomon began to build the temple of the Lord in Jerusalem on Mount Moriah, where the Lord had appeared to David his father. The temple was built on the threshing floor of Araunah the Jebusite, the site that David had selected. The construction began in mid-spring, during the 4th year of Solomon's reign. These are the dimensions Solomon used for the foundation of the temple of God, using the old standard of measurement. It was 90 feet long and 30 feet wide. The entry room at the front of the temple was 30 feet wide, running across the entire width of the temple, and 30 feet high. He overlaid the inside with pure gold. He paneled the main room of the temple with cypress wood, overlaid it with fine gold, and decorated it with carvings of palm trees and chains. He decorated the walls of the temple with beautiful jewels and with gold from the land of Parvaim. He overlaid the beams, thresholds, walls, and doors throughout the temple with gold, and he carved figures of cherubim on the walls. Okay, I'll pause there for a bit. So, the first thing that stuck out to me was mentioning that the temple was built on the threshing floor of Araunah the Jebusite. First of all, Hebrew reads Ornan rather than Araunah, but it's considered a variant spelling. Compare that with 2 Samuel 24, which I guess that's the initial mention of the thing with David going to Araunah and buying that threshing floor, which he bought because David took a census, God didn't like it, and was then, bringing a punishment, a plague, I think, of sorts, upon Israel. And then when the angel that was sort of spreading that plague, death thing, whatever it was, got close to Jerusalem, David prayed to God to make it stop or even bring more of the punishment upon himself, since he was the guilty party. Then God basically tells him, okay, go out to this threshing floor and build an altar. And it turns out to be the threshing floor of Arana. So, like, even in the midst of something bad, even kind of as a result of something that God didn't want, it still turns into something that becomes important later. In this case, that's the reason why David goes to this threshing floor, purchases it from Arana the Jebusite, and then it becomes the site where the temple is built. So, yeah, anyway. Just wanted to point out that connection. Note there where it says the construction began in mid-spring. Hebrews says on the second day of the second month. This day of the ancient Hebrew lunar calendar occurred in April or May, which is why they say mid-spring, during the 4th year of Solomon's reign. That might be mentioned again later if it describes how long the building of the temple took. Note there, the old standard of measurement was a cubit equal to 18 inches. The new standard was a cubit of approximately 21 inches. Interesting. So, the agreed upon length of a cubit apparently changed at some point. It doesn't say when in particular. But in this case, it's using the old cubit standard with each cubit equaling 18 inches. So that, I'm sure, then is related to this. So the Hebrew says 60 cubits long and 20 cubits wide, which, based on 18 inches, which is a foot and a half per cubit, yeah, that's just math then. Multiply the cubits mentioned here by 1.5, and you get 90 and 30. And I'm sure these other two notes here are going to relate to the measurements. Yeah. So the entry room spans the whole width of the temple. And it mentions it being 30 feet high. It doesn't say how long or deep or whatever that it was. Also 30 feet high, as in Greek and Syriac. Hebrew reads 120 cubits, which I suppose it hasn't mentioned a height of the temple overall just yet. So either one is technically possible. But if I'm remembering previous things correctly, previous tellings of the temple building, it seemed more like 30 feet would have been better, because it wasn't like 4 times as tall as it was wide. In those cases, I don't think. But I don't know, feel free to correct me if I'm wrong on that. It's a fairly large building either way. I mean, you've essentially got at least 3 stories high and the same width and double that length. And like all this stuff is getting overlaid with gold and getting these I don't know if decorations is quite the right word, but getting all these details added to it, such as carved figures of cherubim on the walls. So it's a very intricate and rather because of the gold luxurious design. Okay, on to verse 8. He made the most holy place 30 feet wide, corresponding to the width of the temple, and 30 feet deep. He overlaid its interior with 23 tons of fine gold. The gold nails that were used weighed 20 ounces each. He also overlaid the walls of the upper rooms. Also overlaid the walls of the upper rooms with gold. But you know what? I'll keep reading a little bit more. He made 2 figures shaped like cherubim, overlaid them with gold, and placed them in the most holy place. The total wingspan of the 2 cherubim standing side by side was 30 feet. One wing of the first figure was 7.5 feet long, and it touched the temple wall. The other wing, also 7.5 feet long, touched one of the wings of the second figure. In the same way, the second figure had one wing 7.5 feet long that touched the opposite wall. The other wing, also 7.5 feet long, touched the wing of the first figure. So the wingspan of the 2 cherubim side by side was 30 feet. They stood on their feet and faced out toward the main room of the temple. Okay, so we've got an entry room, a main room. I don't mean to air quote it, I'm just doing that to say that's how it's worded in here. We've got an entry room, a main room, and the most holy place. The most holy place alone apparently takes up half the size of the temple, which, considering how much is needed for that, shouldn't be too surprising. I mean, because that's where you've got the Ark of the Covenant, eventually, and at least the altar of incense, if not another altar as well. So, yeah, that's really the main thrust of what happens in the temple in the first place. So, it would make sense for that to take up the most space overall. Also, do 23 tons listed in Hebrew as 600 talents of fine gold were used to overlay the interior. Which, overlaying tells me that it's like, alright, we've got the frame, or like, basically we've got it put together, but now over top of all this, we're gonna put gold. It's just gold everywhere. Also, gold nails were used, and those weighed, in the Hebrew, 50 shekels each, which is believed to be about 570 grams or 20 ounces. So then it describes these cherubim, or these basically cherubim-shaped statues that span the entire width of the temple. You've got one wing touching one wall, extending to the middle of the room on one figure, and then the other one, it's got that wing touching the inner wing of the first one, and then outer wing is touching the opposite wall of the first one. Now, it doesn't mention their height in here, I don't think. But, anyway. Okay, that's all the detail we've got on that for the moment. We will continue then in verse 14. Across the entrance of the most holy place, he hung a curtain made of fine linen, decorated with blue, purple, and scarlet thread, and embroidered with figures of cherubim. By the way, cherubim, for those who don't know, are like a type of angel, essentially. I don't know all the details of the different classifications of angels, but, there are different kinds. Cherubim is one. there's another type called seraphim, and then there might be a third designation, which, again, I'm not sure of like the different ranks of them, so to speak. Usually, any other angel, I guess they also have archangels, which I think are kind of a different category as well. Those tend to be the ones that like actually get named, like Gabriel or Michael or any of those. Anyway, the point is, I just wanted those who aren't familiar with the term cherubim to have an idea that, okay, yeah, these figures that are littered throughout the temple are basically angels, or at least what look like angels of a certain depiction. Angels are kind of described in a few different ways in the Bible as well, but I assume this would be a bit closer to your stereotypical idea of what an angel looks like. Okay, anyway, tangent done. On to verse 15. For the front of the temple, he made 2 pillars that were 37 feet tall, each topped by a capital extending upward another 7.5 feet. He made a network of interwoven chains and used them to decorate the tops of the pillars. He also made 100 decorative pomegranates and attached them to the chains. Then he set up the 2 pillars at the entrance of the temple, one to the south of the entrance and the other to the north. He named the one on the south Jachin and the one on the north Boaz. Okay, it's calling it the front, but it mentions one of these pillars being at the north and one at the south. So that tells me, so the entrance of it was, if I'm remembering correctly, the entrance to the temple was facing east. It was either facing east or west. I'm pretty sure it was east. So these pillars at the entrance were, I mean, including the capitals on top of them, looks like they totaled, what, 34.5 feet high. Maybe add a little extra to it at some point that'll make it 35 feet overall, just for like thickness of certain materials. So yeah, that was the front of the temple, meaning the entrance, I guess you'd say. And then he's got these chains hanging from them with these pomegranate-looking things. Whether they were actually, like, dried pomegranates that were preserved a certain way, or just things made to look like pomegranates. Those were hung down from the chains then. Okay. Now we'll look at the notes. 27 feet, as in the Syriac version. See also 1 Kings 7:15, 2 Kings 25:17, and Jeremiah 52:21, which reads 18 cubits. Hebrew reads 35 cubits. I guess due to other measurements mentioned, they probably figured it was more likely, the translators probably figured it was more likely that it was overall close to 30 feet. Since 30 feet was mentioned elsewhere. To note there at the interwoven chains, he made chains in the inner sanctuary, but the meaning of the Hebrew is uncertain. So, that almost gives more the impression that, like, going from these entrance pillars, perhaps inside the temple, then were chains that were hung. Which, I mean, either way, it's... I think it still serves a similar decorative purpose to have the chains and the pomegranates there. It's just, it might have been a little more spread out horizontally if the network of chains went inside rather than it just being like between the two pillars. If it was just between the entry pillars, then maybe it all hung vertically a bit more. But anyway, last note here. Jachin probably means he establishes, and Boaz means in him is strength. So, that was why Solomon named these pillars that way, to kind of serve as ways of describing God's relationship with them, what God does for the people. And I mean, I was also thinking for a sec, wait, Boaz was the guy that married Ruth, and wasn't David descended from them? But not saying that necessarily was part of the thinking in naming the one pillar like that. But that would also leave me wondering about the name Jachin, if that had any connection to that same possibility. So, let's just stick with what we know, is that those names meant something like these particular things. Alright, so there's at least a bunch of the general outline, the general gist of the temple and its layout, its construction. Okay, so there we have the main structure of the temple being built. Again, this is kind of recap stuff, but I guess getting details on just the splendor of the temple kind of would indicate to the exiled Israelites that A, here's what we lost. B, here's what we want to try to rebuild. Ezra being part of the, like, resettling and rebuilding efforts. Of course, he's going to want to point out, like, hey, here's what we're trying to get back to. So, anyway, yeah. As always, like and share if you enjoyed the video. Subscribe to the channel and click the bell to get updates when I post new videos. Make sure you look down in the description for links to social media pages and all sorts of good stuff like that. Discord server, supporter page, all of that. And down below there, leave your thoughts and questions in the comment section. So that'll do it for now. Hope you're all doing well. Hopefully I'll see you soon for another video. But whatever the case is, till next time, stay cool, people.